Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar Podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Beth.
I'm Hayley.
I'm KD.
And before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. And we are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliar. Our topic for today is going to be how you can grow complex and interesting characters. Start from that little germ of a seed that you've got for your character concept, get it to sprout out and grow into a big, beautiful thing so that during the climax of the campaign, that thing can be just reaped and burned. So I'm going to start off with how to grow an interesting character. One of the things that you have to do is you have to go into it with some degree of introspection. The types of players who never think about their character outside of the game, those players very rarely have characters who actually grow. So I feel like introspection is of vital importance for growing a character, because if you're not thinking about it, you're not developing it. Developing according to what has happened in the game and how that might change your character, and internalizing those things that have happened in the campaign. I think of it like the absolute antithesis of this advice is given by Rick Sanchez, in that just don't think about it, Morty.
Yeah, I think you see there's static and there's dynamic players, right? That sort of reflects down on their characters to some extent too. Because you're absolutely right. If you're not thinking about how the character would look at the events that just happened in the game, at least, you don't have to, dwell on it, lose sleep over it, or, think about it, 24/7, but, I don't know, if you're at work or at school or whatever you do, and you have some downtime, maybe you just, think about it. Because that's definitely going to help you figure out where your character's going from there, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense if their brother just died and they were a happy-go-lucky character before, but now they're still happy-go-lucky, but maybe that's how they handle grief, but you should still, show that that's how they handle grief, interpret it that way, rather than just showing up to the session and being like, fuck, my brother's dead, that's right, yeah, let's just shrugs, whatever, you don't want to deal with something like that.
Yeah, what's the next mission?
Yeah, what's on the agenda for today? My brother's in the ground already, it's fine.
I think that keeping in mind that any sort of character that you want to bring complexity to, every character should start with an overriding concept. But it's in those concepts where they're challenged in the game in some way that you get a complex character, because they think about the changes, they think about the challenges that they have faced. And in real life, people grow from being challenged with what they think that they know, what they think they can handle. And those challenges, more often than not, just grow into, me personally, my views of the world have changed a lot since I was in college. I wouldn't say I think differently, but I definitely have a much more nuanced way of viewing the world. And characters should grow in the same way. Your stereotypical game has your character who's, well, most players I've ever played with, their characters are aged young adult, meaning under 30. And that in real life is the time of life where you're really establishing who you are and how you think about the world. It's during that age range where you get the most, not necessarily conflict, but you get the most challenges to the way that you think, because you're going out into the real world and ideally you're trying to put some of your ideals to practice, and seeing that sometimes it just flat out doesn't work. The world doesn't work that way. The stereotypical young person coming into work who knows everything, and then they learn the real world while they're at the job. And a lot of characters can be in that same way. You create this in a fantasy game, a fresh off the farm, a fantasy or certain sci-fi fantasies, a fresh off the farm.
Good old Tatooine.
Yeah. Who has this idealized version of how things work in the world, and when they want to grow up and become a pilot, and they learn that there's more to that. War is actually worse than just being in a plane and shooting down a plane or a spaceship and shooting down other enemies. KD, you said, or on a previous recording, that you like to start with a goal for your characters and just give them a way that they can progress and a way that they can grow, and always keeping some sort of a goal, because ideally you're going to reach those goals, even if, like, at the very beginning you have a character with a very short-term goal. Like, I think the example you gave was like buying a sword or something like that. The process by which a brand new character goes out and does that's how they meet adversity and how they are able to overcome that adversity, even if it's just the very minor adversity of the shopkeeper is a dick.
Gotta roll that charisma.
Yeah. All of those little things can influence a character.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody have any examples of characters that they've played and, like, from the get-go had a way of growing the character from there?
Before that, whenever you said the thing about like characters facing challenges and coming up against what they think they can handle versus what they can actually handle, it like occurred to me, like, I've never personally played or seen a character played like this, but that if you had a character who, say, had a really bad set of roles, like, you could role play that they, like, lose faith in themselves and they start, like, refusing to even try like to do that. It just, like, occurred to me that would be interesting.
Yeah, this is not my tale, but I do have an example of that.
Oh, yeah?
I'm in this game called Vampire the Masquerade. Don't worry, I'll talk about it a lot during this podcast.
I'm sure you've probably already heard of it.
Yeah! But we're currently in our 4th story arc right now, and we introduced a new character. My friend, insert name, let's call him S, is playing a character named Dan. Dan, on his first session, on his first roll, got 2 botches. And every single roll after on his first session trying to make first impressions on the rest of our characters got either no successes or some extent of botches. And it broke this character, where he's trying so hard to impress the rest of us. He has had his faith shaken in himself as a marksman, and he has not shot any guns since, in fear that he's going to shoot one of us, like he did several times during the first time we met him. It's been amazing to watch him go, because he was playing this overly confident, perfect marksman, and I love it. And the first time we met, he, like, shot 2 of us. One of us accidentally messed up and staked him by accident. Like, we were all just rolling botches, everything. It was the first session, and it really set the tone for how the rest of the game was going to play. And his character's been doing pretty well with trying to assess the fact that he is not as up to par as he thought he was. It's been great.
That's cool.
Yeah, a series of failed rolls, especially at the very beginning of a game, can really set the tone for a character and make a character completely different. The character that I have in mind for this is not a character that I played, but a character that my now brother-in-law played back when we were in college. We were playing a quasi-modern game with very, very, very high fantasy elements in it, and he was playing essentially this B-movie martial arts guy.
It was so fantastic.
And he had this fan club that I created, and
was he a goblin?
Yes,
named Svik, who had the best little voice ever.
Well, Svik was the president of the fan club.
Yeah.
There was at the beginning there was a whole lot of more fans
At the beginning.
Yeah.
Where did they go, Clayton?
Well, after a series of rolling 1 on his attempts to perform acrobatic martial arts moves, every single one of the members of this fan club deserted him except for Svik. Little diehard teenage Svik, the goblin, who absolutely loved him, and in the end, his character could do no wrong. But that colored that character for the rest of that campaign. Just the fact that he was this martial artist, he had done it in movies, but then in real life, he was not a great martial artist.
And there were all these great descriptions of the like failed roles and stuff like that, where he'd try to do these big tricks and just like fall flat on his face, and Svick was still like, "Yay!"
I also have an example of that, and to continue the trend, oddly enough, is not someone I've played, because I guess other people just think a character's better than us guys. But in one of the games that I played rather recently with a couple friends, a friend was playing this sort of roguish character whom like was kind of a charmer, you know, really tried to like smooth talk things and like just sleight of hand. He was kind of a magician, you know. But for whatever reason, anytime he had to do one of two things, either survival, which makes sense, you know, like this magician should not be out in the woods trying to make a campfire. But then sleight of hand, he just wouldn't roll well. Anyway, like anytime, you know, and so he kept constantly failing these checks that he should pass since he was this great thief magician character. And so finally he decides, guys, the reason I haven't been making the rolls is I'm just drunk 24/7. And so his character, and this is about a fourth of the way through the game, for the last 3/4 of the game, he constantly had a flask. Like, he was always drunk. He would take the negs on purpose to reflect that, like, God, if I ever sobered up, I'd be such an effective character, you know? And then, so eventually, he started working into, like, his mechanics that, like, he started getting, like, some drunk savant sort of stuff in there. And at the end of the game, like, we were on this, like, we were fighting this collector of magical items. And we defeat him, and everybody gets, like, one item. And, of course, you know, whatever your mind desires. And he picks an ever-filling flask. But it's just hilarious to me, because he didn't start off as a drunk. Like, he really wanted to play this, like, kind of serious, like, smart, cunning thief character. And then just couldn't roll well, so he decided, well, I'm just drunk all the time. Like, that's just why I'm not, you know, doing well. But then it started off as a joke that became just a core part of his character, was that, like, he was this drunken savant, you know? But not in the things he should be good at, in other things. I think that's an interesting way to approach the issue of, I'm not rolling well.
Yeah.
So let's factor it into the character.
And I think all of these examples illustrate the core of, in order to change, you have to be open to the change. I've seen a lot of players who are good role players. They create really cool, interesting characters, but they are the same character from session 1 until session 10, until session 12, until session 20, however long the campaign goes. They really don't have a character arc as far as character growth, character change. They're just accumulating power. They're just becoming more of what they were rather than becoming...
do you mean power in like a mechanical sense?
Yes.
Or like in a
mechanical.
okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Like in D&D, they're just gaining
levels.
They're not becoming a great wizard. They were a great wizard to begin with. They're just adding more spells to their list.
I think that's kind of unfortunate, because sometimes you have people who are like, I really like the way this character is now, and they're like, well, I don't want to change, which I guess I can understand, you know, if you're really attached to that idea of that character. But change is not an inherently bad thing. You know, change is something that, for characters in an RPG sense, at least, not going to get into real life, but, you know, change is something that can, like, keep your character the same. You know, before all this, Clayton, you mentioned that back in college, you thought a certain way, and then now you still think a certain way, but you have changed somewhat. Like, you're not a different person, you're still the same person. And I think that a lot of people don't make that connection for RPG characters either. Mm-hmm. They think that, like, oh, if I'm in this fictional universe where the story's being told, my character has to have as, like, dramatic of a character transformation as, like, Luke from episode 4 to 6, you know, if we're using the Star Wars analogy. Like, that's a pretty drastic character change. Yeah. You know, it goes from farm boy to, like, philosophical Jedi master. That's huge. But that doesn't have to be that. Like, it can be small, nuanced things that still change your character. Not on a fundamental level, but at least somewhat, I feel like. And I feel like people are afraid to embrace that to an extent. Because, again, they're probably attached to the idea that they had at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. The examples we've given have all been, like, spontaneous growth, which is absolutely awesome. When it happens, like, when the opportunity shows itself, if you can grab that and use it to evolve your character, that is the best form of character growth, is the growth that you didn't plan. But there is also growth that you can plan. You can have an idea of where you want your character to be down the road. An example of this that I've done is, so I had this character who was the son of a baron who was set to inherit a barony. But just before the start of this campaign, everybody in my character's family had gotten killed, and the barony had been overrun by this invading army that was literally taking over everywhere in the kingdom. So the player characters were kind of rising up to fight this invading army. And my character had a very stalwart man-at-arms with him at all times. My character was a human, and this man-at-arms was a half-orc. Well, I had planned out this character in way greater detail than what anybody could ever possibly want to know about this character. Not only did I write my backstory, I created a 3-generation family tree.
Good lord.
Medieval family tree. So this isn't like modern days where you've got one mom and one dad and they produce a bunch of kids. No, this is like I rolled to see whether or not each kid killed the mother during childbirth. And it was a medieval family, so it was big. So my character had 5 siblings and 5 legitimate siblings. My my character's father had, I want to say, 7 siblings. They all had kids, so I had my cousins, and then each one of those siblings, if they were male, they had several different wives, because chances are a couple of wives would die during childbirth. So in 3 generations, I made up this family backstory that was probably had maybe 30 people on it, and I gave a brief description of who each person was. God. I created this family knowing ahead of time that at the start of this campaign, this family was going to get wiped out.
I love it.
It's dedication, Clayton.
Oh, man.
But there was one secret that I held back. I told the game master about it, but one secret that I held back from the other players, because I wanted this to come out in game, and I wanted it to be as a point at which I could grow the character by the reaction of the other player characters around me. In this campaign, orcs were a big part of this invading army. So they were automatically a little distrustful of my man-at-arms, but I trusted him absolutely implicitly and explicitly. You could not shake my my faith in my man-at-arms. The other player characters found out why. 6 sessions into this campaign, because this man-at-arms, he's the frontline fighter. In D&D, eventually the frontline fighter is going to go down in combat. They'll get dropped to drop to 0, drop to negatives. They'll go down and they'll have to be rescued. I knew this was going to happen, so I set it up so that everybody kind of had distrusted my man-at-arms. They didn't like him, and I dropped this bombshell in combat where he goes down. Like, I screamed at the cleric, "Save him! Save my brother!"
Oh.
And then we got to develop that in game. All the other players were great role players. We got to develop that in game as like they had to kind of change their perceptions of this half-orc character who I was playing by proxy. But still, that was a great character growth that then I got to, my main character and that character kind of got to grow and become better people as a result of that revelation and finally trusting somebody to know this black stain upon the family.
That's such a beautiful story. Did they save him? Did they save your brother?
Yes, they...
Good.
I have to expect to be like, he went down.
No. That's beautiful.
Yeah, they saved him.
I love that.
In that combat.
Yeah, you were talking about starting with a secret, and my idea was starting with like a problem or a weakness. Some systems have them, included like as disadvantages or something like that. To start with something like that, an addiction, some sort of problem that needs to be solved, it falls under goals as well. But, like, I feel like if you really want to have character growth, you really need to have a plan when you're going into it. As you can't just start, just with what you want to overcome. But I think it's good to sit down, with your GM and kind of try to work together to decide, how this change is going to take place. And my big example for that is Anna in our current Abena campaign. I kind of had an idea that she would, where she started, being rescued from a deserted island. And originally I was going to, like, the first time we were in a big crowd, I was going to have her have, like, a panic attack because she wasn't used to having people around her. But something ended up, I chickened out of it, or the scene didn't happen or something. I don't remember exactly what it was that happened. But I was going to have her, grow from that to where, relatively recently she's taken over second in command of the army. And that wasn't a planned thing. That was just, like, circumstances led to that. And it was a little bit, it's kind of off topic, but I don't care. There's a little bit of a metagaming thing behind it, too, because, I as a player wasn't sure I wanted to take her to the whole second in command of the army thing, but if not, it was going to be an NPC that was going to be second in command, and I just didn't like that. I just didn't feel like that was good, like, story-wise, So she sort of, like, grew against what I was intending to do with her. Although the other thing that occurred, I feel like I'm rambling.
No, go on, I love it.
The other thing, something that occurred to me just the other day, though, is that because she got brought off of the island and was taken off by Talon, who's on this big quest to gather these magical artifacts and destroy them because they're too powerful. I wonder if she might not, whenever that main quest is over, have, like, a crisis of purpose, kind of like Inigo Montoya in The Princess Bride, like the six-fingered man is dead, now what do I do with my life?
What do I do with my life? Have you ever thought about being a pirate? I think you'd make a great dreaded pirate Roberts.
Yep, which would work in our world, too, because we have all those ships.
Oh my god!
I could be the dreaded
Clayton,
pirate Roberts.
This is how we have to end a beta. We all become pirates!
But yeah, whenever I originally filled out my sheet with the information for Anna, like, I just basically was like, oh, she doesn't know what to do with herself, so she's looking for her purpose and place in the world, which is very vague. And I didn't know where I wanted to go with it, and, kind of got into the flow of the story and didn't give it very much more thought, and now we're almost, finished with it, and I'm like, what is her? She still doesn't have a purpose, which kind of, I don't know, so she's grown in some ways, but in some ways she's right where she started. She didn't grow in the way that I had originally intended for her to grow.
I feel very on the similar track, as well as talking about Abena, because I had a very clear idea of what I wanted to do with my character Desdemona, in the sense of I made this pure ray of sunshine, and they said, okay, now go fight a war, and see what happens to that ray as it's distinguished. But, she's persisted a lot through a lot of shit, and she's on a quest to find her dad, and she's never strayed from that quest at all. She very, very badly wants to find her dad, but something I've been discovering as when I'm playing her is that her motives might not be as pure as she thinks that they are, in the sense of, we're coming towards the end of the campaign, and I started with this happy-go-lucky, I want to find my dad because I want to know that, like, I was wanted, and also I'll have a father, and it'll be great, and I'll have a family, and it'll be lovely, and he'll just want me and accept me, and it'll be great when I find him. To the point where I actually know who my dad is, and I have a chance to go find him, and she's just angry and sad, and wants to confront him, and also beat him up a little bit. And,
that's so cool, though. Like,
yeah.
that completely makes sense.
Yeah. She's like, did you know my mom was gonna die? Like, you left her to die alone. Like, why? Why did you do that? Was I her death sentence? Like, am I just another story to you? Like, she is upset.
You fucking book.
Yeah!
Tear some pages out of you.
Guys, turns out my dad's a book. He's also a god, so that makes me a demigod. But I had planned this character to have sadness in her, and I mean, I named her Desdemona after my favorite tragic ingenue. At you, Shakespeare. Thanks for that gift. But planning her growth to be like, oh, I'm gonna find my dad, and oh, it's really sad. To be like, oh, it's not sad. It's angry. It's anger time. It's time to grow some freaking ovaries and be the half-nymph of your dreams and just grow some balls. You don't need a dad. You don't need anybody, Desdemona. You as a strong, independent half-nymph who don't need nobody.
I think I'm in the minority, at least at the table, in that Magnus, my character from Abena, essentially turned out kind of how I planned him to. Clayton and I, we talked a little bit about his lineage and how his parents would factor into the campaign. I always predicted that his character arc was going to be sort of realize that the only way to stop the invasion, because his race was invading a different land, was to go to battle against them and eventually fight both his parents, who were leading this invasion force. And so he was starting off from like a perspective of friendly member of the group, you know, kind of fearsome warrior, but when he's at camp, he's like the cook and all this other jazz.
He's my adoptive dad.
Desdemona's adopted father. To sort of in the last couple sessions, as I intended, he gets this grim determination and sort of fatalism about him, where he acknowledges that, like, I have to take them out, and I'm probably going to lose my life doing so. So,
yeah, but you also realized that your parents being the leadership of the Vikinger, your character would have been next in line. They were going to need leaders after this, because regardless of how, like, unless they were absolutely successful, which wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, player party intervened on that front.
You as a player and a character realized that if you guys succeeded in your task, your entire race of people was going to need leadership. And you wrestled with that a lot, leading up to the final battle, as to this grim determination that if I have to die doing it, I will stop this atrocity from happening. But then at the very last second, when the deed was done and death was coming in, you had to make the decision of, well, do I sacrifice myself to save my friends, or do I try all of us to get out by the skin of our teeth so that I might lead in the future? Mm-hmm. And the decision to, right now, my friends count more than what might happen in the future. I feel like that right there was such a great character growth moment.
It was impromptu for sure, but yeah. It was good I got put in that circumstance, because I'll be honest, had Jordan, who's not here today, his character had been trying to get everybody out, and there's not a consensus on whether or not it would have worked.
Wait.
But
in character, there is not a consensus. I, the game master, am telling you and everybody who listens to this, if you hadn't done what you did, your characters were fucked.
Really?
Then you heard it here today.
Oh, thanks, Magnus. Thanks for dying for our sins.
Because the thing Jordan forgot is that his spell does not go off the round he casts it. He has to concentrate, and he had to open himself up to attack. And you guys were surrounded by an army. He was going to get hit. Because he couldn't pre-cast the spell and then touch you guys. He had to grab hold of you guys and cast it.
Right. That's true. But like, I don't know. I thought that... You're right, that was like a impromptu character growth at the end, but he kind of, I felt, sort of fulfilled what I envisioned with him. At the very least, once I established who my parents were, because for the first couple sessions, it was kind of a murky... Mm-hmm. We weren't sure, both of us weren't sure who they were. But, you know, once that sort of came to light, and I had this idea of what I wanted to do, that sort of worked out for me. I will say that is one of the few pre-planned characters that's like gone off. Normally, I'm much more of a like letting things happen to my character and let that shape them rather than, you know. I guess that's the difference. Do you let the world shape your character, or does your character try to shape the world?
I think it really depends on the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, it should be a little bit of both.
Right.
But in history, great men shape the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But great men are shaped by the events that created them, and then they go out and do great things. Very recently, I listened to the Dan Carlin hardcore history about Genghis Khan, and like that example of this guy being raised in abject poverty, his people being fucked over time and time again, and then himself growing an empire that spanned bigger than anything the world has ever known. and then him in his old age realizing, I've got to change because I created this vast empire. The next in line is going to have to manage that. So the change in philosophy that he went through at the very end of his life just shows in real life, and also hopefully a good, really cool character, if you were to base a character on Genghis Khan, of how the world shapes the man shapes the world, and then the new world that the man has created continues to shape him.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good example, actually. I hadn't really thought about it like that before.
We've talked about just be open for changes as they come up.
Yeah.
Some of the worst characters to create, if you want to make a character who grows and has complexity, the worst thing you can do is create a character who is stubborn, or a character who has an absolute ideology and is not wavering from that absolute ideology. Like I said earlier, I've seen characters who are the same person from the very start of the campaign to the end of the campaign. I've also seen players create this perfect ideological representation of a person, and then 5-6 sessions later, they're tired of the character because they don't see what else the character can do. They don't see what else the character can be.
Oh no, I was just agreeing.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I actually have a bit of an example on my part of that. I've talked a little bit about a long-running game that I'm in that's had like multiple iterations. And the first one I ever joined in with, I was playing a character whom was like a small-town farm boy whom was just... The only way I can really describe him is an flowing bucket of compassion. And, like, he refused to see, like, the evil. He always saw the good in everybody. He refused to, like, think that anyone was evil at heart, or intentionally would do something to hurt someone else. They always had a good reason for doing what they did. And he was coming into this world that... It was my first time in it as a player, and I had been told that it was very, like, not even necessarily super grimdark, but, like, bad things happen to good people more often than bad things happen to bad people. And so I was, I suppose, a bit determined to prove, for once, that a character like mine could exist in this world. And it turned into a grudge match between me and the GM, like, in a good way, in that the GM just threw everything he could at me. Like, I got captured by, like, raiders, and they, like, chopped off my fingers, and all this other kind of stuff kept happening. He was a magic user, and so there would be times where, like, I would roll to, like, make an attack roll. His in-character girlfriend was a frontline fighter, and they'd be like, GM would be like, oh, you rolled bad, you incinerate her hair, because he used acid magic. And I'd be like, and, like, all this other stuff happened. But I wasn't willing to change with the game, is what I'm getting at here. I was stubborn, out of character, in that I wanted to have this character stay a good person throughout the entire way, even though he may start to sort of shift his viewpoints after, getting fucked over for the 18th time. Yeah, and so instead I guess I was stubborn, rather than the character being stubborn. So I guess, what do you guys think of that? Do you think that's a bad thing to do? Do you think... Because there was points in the game where I did sort of reflect on... I wasn't, like, overall stubborn. There was points where I reflected, like, oh, my character maybe says something a little rougher than he normally would to this person. There was a point where he was actively mean to someone. There was only one point in the whole game. And I tried to use that as, like, he's sort of realizing that the world isn't what he thought it was. But I was determined to keep this character who it was, because I felt the core of this character was that they were a good person, and that they weren't... There was a quote, a lot of people called him naive. I always thought he was an optimist, and that he knew full well that the things he believed in weren't true, but he chose to believe it otherwise. So maybe ignorance, I suppose, could also be a factor. But I don't know, I'm just curious what you guys think.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to play a character that doesn't change if that's what you're wanting to do. You know what I mean? Like, if you're getting what you want out of the character... I think we're talking more about, like, if you want to have a character change because, you either want a certain story, or you tend to get bored with the character after a while if they stay the same, or something like that. if you had wanted to change something, I think like the most important thing is to come into it, like Clayton was saying, with the understanding or with the belief that people continue to change throughout their lives. That like nobody's like in real life and in games with changeable characters, like nobody's ever done as a person. Right. You know what I mean? Like you never really reach, like you can be self-actualized at all, like Clayton was saying, at all these different ages, but you're different each time. Like you're not ever finished.
And specifically in like a very grimdark setting, it is super heroic to be that good person who remains the good person. Like that is the type of character who then in a generation or two later, that's who the good people can point to and rally behind, and who they can impose the change in the world to become a better place. If that's the type of character that you want to play, I mean, sometimes you do just want to play a saint in a hellish world, because that's what the world needs. Now, in the real world, people come out of college getting degrees in social work, and they get out and they think they're going to change the world, they're going to make things better, and a lot of people get burnt out. But there are some people who go their entire careers, they get a little bit jaded, they get a little bit cynical, but they remain that core person who they were, believing that even if they realize they can't change the world, but they can change the lives of the people that they touch. And that's I feel like that's kind of the character growth that you were wanting. You were staying good, but you were realizing that bad shit happens. People take advantage of people who are like that, so maybe take a few more precautions, but you're still the good person.
Right. And that's ultimately what I was trying to go for. At the end of the campaign, however, I will say the GM in the final session just threw so much crap at me that like my character did break just due to the circumstances. I won't get into it because it's too long of a story, but there was just all this crap happening, and so it was one of those things where like there was going to be more games in this universe, right? So this character would become an NPC. And I was like, well, I don't think he's completely broken. Like you said, I think he's realized he has to take some precautions and be more jaded, but I think he'll always be that person at heart. But it was very clear the GM did not see my point of view on it, and, sort of went from there.
And in that kind of a situation, really, if you think about it, the person who stays the path of being good in the face of all that is exerting a lot more strength and energy than the person who kind of changes according to it and becomes, completely cynical and jaded. So, yeah, I don't know. It's still a kind of growth if you're looking at growth in terms of like showing your strength. And
on the opposite side of the coin that we've all been talking from the player's perspective, but the game master has to be open to the change as well. And it sounds like your game master wanted a particular change in you, and so the game master was going to do everything within their power in order to affect that change.
That's true,
and that definitely is something that, I mean, it's akin to dictating something about your character. And in that situation, I think the game master was probably the one being stubborn, probably being more stubborn by not recognizing your character and then growing the character in a more natural way that is more in line with what the player wants.
Yeah, and like when we saw this character in the next game, he was just this like dead inside, hyper sarcastic, jaded character that was nothing like it was almost like a completely separate character from the one I had played a game ago. And I remember like I've talked to the game master about this since then, but it was very much so just a matter of like, oh darn, like I wish that my character could add a shot at what he was supposed to be rather than turning into what you wanted him to be.
Yeah.
To an extent.
Yeah, I don't agree with that at all.
Yeah. That sucks. I'm sorry.
Trying to force change in somebody's character.
All right, we have reached consensus and told it how it is. How it should be.
How it is.
So if you're listening to this, we're coming for you.
Everything is black and white in this world.
Yeah. Kind of bouncing off what you just described in your character, I'm going to tell a little bit more about the same character that I described earlier.
This is the noble, right?
This is the noble with the half-orc brother. Here's something that in the campaign changed my character that I had not planned. I had described earlier how his entire family had been wiped out. All he had left was his brother.
Mm-hmm. Half-brother.
Well, his half-brother, but it was his only family, so it was his brother. Well, die rolls are fickle things. That character did actually get killed.
Oh, no.
His half-orc brother got killed. And up until this point, I had tried to make this character like a good leader who was leading this valiant fight against this hostile invader and trying to reclaim what was his birthright and reclaim the lands of all the people who had fallen under their sway. And after that character's half-brother, his only living relative left, was killed, I realized my character had lost everything. And he was now in command of a big enough army that didn't have a big enough army that he could take on the whole force. And after all this atrocity had been done to him, the last straw was the death of his brother. So from that point on in the campaign, my character got really dark. He started doing the types of atrocities back to the invaders that they had perpetrated on him. And so my character took this very dark turn, started doing some things that at the very beginning of the campaign I would not have entertained. Mm-hmm. It was entirely logical within the framework of this campaign, and it wasn't something that I had planned. This evilness rising within him, especially after I had taken a level of paladin.
Whoops.
Yeah. I had specifically taken, metagame, I had taken the level of paladin so I could have some healing for my character's brother.
Wasn't enough.
It was not enough. But that was a lot of fun. And I realized toward the end of the campaign that this character was not going to be able to survive, or was not going to be able to become a ruler after having had all of this done. So I orchestrated a situation for that character to die valiantly, urging on his companions to continue to take up the fight and to avenge all the people who had been wronged and who had died along the way. And my character was able to still die a hero, even though he had done some dark things.
Man, I'd watch the fuck out of that movie. I love unexpected twists that really help you in a great way discover this character. Be like, oh, that's not something that would have done, and further it on. And I think it's time to tell a tale of romance. So, Vampire the Masquerade.
Can you rephrase that, but as a normal person?
No. So this is my favorite character and my favorite story to tell. So I'm really excited, guys. So
buckle up, everybody. We're going in.
It's a ride. So I am currently in this game, Vampire the Masquerade. Shocker. And I am playing a daughter of cacophony named Annalise. Picture, if you will, an amalgamation of every awful femme fatale character you've ever seen in movies. Helga from Atlantis, Irene Adler, just a lot of Jessica Rabbit. Ooh, it's just, choice. This person. And then give her no empathy. Give her an ex-boyfriend named Al Capone, who's also a vampire. And a lot of pettiness. Ooh. So the game started, we were all originally from Chicago, and we were, for some reason or another, exiled and dumped off in the middle of the desert in Las Vegas, told to survive on our own. My girl was the ex-lover of Al Capone, and she was kicked out of the city because people liked her more than they liked the prince, Al Capone. And he kicked her out because, can't have women in power. So she's like, oh, okay, that's fine, you're gonna break up with me? I'm going to kill everybody that you care about, bottle their ashes, and then send them to you to let you know that I'm coming for your ass. She burnt Vegas to the ground and built it up from the ashes. This is the character we're dealing with. She goes around seducing everybody to get what she wants because she knows that she can do it easily. Then enter one Rob Aiken, who is an NPC, but a personal character that the DM likes to introduce in every single game of his. He happens to be a terrorist, a vampire terrorist who specifically hates corrupt princes like Al Capone, and my character's first instinct is to seduce him. And she makes her first ever botch roll, and he has no interest in her whatsoever. She's like, what is this? Somebody who doesn't want to fuck this? Gesturing to all of herself. She's like, okay, I have to, not because I'm interested in him, but just because I have to break him down. I have to continue pursuing this. And it was beautiful in the sense of she finally found somebody who had no interest in her looks whatsoever. And they could actually have conversations about blowing people up and being terrorists. And slowly but surely, they fell in love, mostly because immediately after she was rejected by him, she got into a car crash where she almost died, and he was the only person there that could save her, and she had to drink some of his blood and was bloodbound to him. And she's like, that's not happening. I'm not letting you have any power over me. And she had to earn her blood bond to him, which pissed her the fuck off. But they truly developed a connection, and she was learning how to trust people. She was using all of the other party members for her little revenge scheme, and she's like, okay, letting them in, being open, and then that story arc ended with them saying that they actually cared about each other. She was getting more empathy, learning how to deal with people, and it was really great for her to open up and not be a stone-cold bitch, which was awesome. And eventually it ended with her gaining, 2 in empathy. She lost some willpower, and it's really dictated to where she is now, which is, that's of my own creation. We'll talk about that later. She's not the same person she started off as, but love changes you. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worst. Her and Rob are now the Bonnie and Clyde of the underworld, the most wanted terrorist couple ever. They go around destroying corrupt princes, and I love them! Ooh, they're such a good couple.
It's so nice when you can bond over explosives and terrorism.
I know!
That brings up an interesting thing. Romance or just characters being instrumental in your character's growth, whether it's, was this another PC or was this an NPC?
This was the DM's PC of a game he played before, and
So
he
it was
brought
an
him in
NPC.
as an NPC. Yes.
Okay. So, in that case, does anybody, I guess, what do people think about that? Does anybody else have any other examples?
Of a relationship, specifically,
relationship,
changing?
causing your character to
I
change.
do, actually. From the Evil campaign that Clayton DM'd back in college, I had a character named Shadiah who was a succubus. The way that Evil campaign started was where we had lost our memories and we had no idea what sort of skills we had, we just basically knew we had an urge to be evil. We basically had an evil alignment, and that was the only thing that we really knew about ourselves. So we started as kind of an evil blank slate. And one of the big reveals in the story was that it turns out that my husband from when I was alive was actually a paladin who had died on the material plane and was now essentially an angel, serving his god. And that reveal to me was allowed me to make the choice of whether to just brush him aside and continue following the path of evil, or whether to try to reunite with him and go back on the path of good. And I ended up choosing going with him. And then that was the big reveal, to the party.
So sweet.
Of me, a succubus walking up with, what, did he actually have wings, or did he, big angel wings? I don't remember.
He did not have wings. No.
I picture him as having big angel wings. I just added this by myself. But white robes, probably, or something.
Yeah, you're the character with the wings.
I know I had wings, but I'm just but mine, were the succubus bat wings. So that picture. So I probably added the white wings because I like that picture together. The two sides of everything.
Did it work out?
Clayton will have to say, I'm terrible at remembering. There's a large period of time when we played games that I'm horrible at remembering them, because it was before I realized I was getting sick, and I used to fall asleep halfway through every game we ever tried to play, and I was a terribly rude gamer.
Your character did end up with him.
Yes, love is real.
Wow.
I won't go too deep into like kind of the epilogue of it because that was something that I mined several times, and I'll probably mine for this group if I ever do a Planescape campaign again. Which I'm not saying if I ever do a Planescape campaign, I will come back around to Planescape because it's my favorite campaign setting.
My favorite too.
I have one that's not necessarily romance, but it is a relationship between two characters that caused one to change quite significantly. And it's set in the same universe as my previous example. It was in the game after that one. And I was playing a character whom was like a revolutionary, had fought a war in the previous game. He was an NPC, had fought a war in the previous to like free a country, from a corrupt nobility. About, as happens in history, sometimes you realize that the thing you're fighting for, and when people get up there, it's just as bad as what was before. And so he was this alcoholic, sort of like washed up former soldier that just didn't know where he was going anymore. He had a cause he believed in with his whole heart. He had betrayed his family for it, and then to find out that cause was hollow, it had shattered him at the start of the game. So that was where I was coming in playing him. He was at the start of the game. He was this bounty hunter, and him and his girlfriend were like just trying to put food on the table, and that was it. He didn't have any bigger aspirations. But he meets another PC, and she was playing sort of a cleric, a holy woman. And the two, at first, you would think really don't get along. And it would make sense, I'm like a drunk, and like, yes, I kind of respect the church because my family used to be religious, but like, I'm kind of shoot first, ask questions later. I'm not very nice to people, and she, on the other hand, is this like eternal mom figure who just sees herself as the Madonna and all this other stuff. But over the course of the game, these two realize they have a lot more in common. They both came from a situation where they didn't really have a whole lot of family, and among other things. And she eventually sort of, the catalyst for this was a rather bad drunken episode of this, of a session where my character was drunk for the entire thing, and things got out of control. Bars burned down. Good. That whole jazz. I'm sure everyone at this table knows how those things go.
Oh, yeah.
As they do.
Every time we play D&D, something has to burn to the ground.
Fucking, like, drunkenly knocked up his girlfriend. He was a mess, right? And so they're on this boat going to the next sort of location, and she, like, slaps him, and she's just like, God damn it, like, look what happens, and all this other stuff. And he realizes, you know what, she's right. Like, she's right. Like, I need to get control of myself. And so he sort of from that point on reforms. And that was sort of the start. And then their relationship, because if anyone else had come up and like hit him and told him like, stop being a drunk, he would have just hit him back, But like that, they had the sort of the dynamic, and they trusted each other enough that he was like, she's right. I need to like reform myself. And so he sort of gives up the drink, and he sort of starts to find a path. He, interacts with some other NPCs, who, were part of the world police I've mentioned in this game. And he realizes, maybe that's what I need to do. Maybe I need to go fight for the people. Because that was why I did this war in the first place, was I was fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. And so he sort of, that was his whole character arc. But the catalyst of the entire character arc was that situation and the relationship that he had with that holy woman, where she and him, could talk, and the bond they shared allowed him to just like don't be an asshole anymore, So, but so like it wasn't a romance. Like
I'm still romanced by the story.
Well, there you go. Yeah, they both got together with different people. Like I mentioned, he'd already had a partner coming into the game, but by the end of the game, they like definitely considered themselves very close, like sibling level, adopted sibling level, and like. I don't know, I think it's not a romance, but that is the entire character arc took like a completely different shape for him after they sort of interacted with each other.
Have you ever had a character change for the worse?
Who, buddy?
I already described that.
I gotta think on that one.
While you're thinking, I'm going to go over my character who actually changed because of another player character. Actually, I've got two examples, but one of them is from our currently on hiatus Eclipse Phase game. My character, Rain, is essentially a Bible thumper in Eclipse Phase, and this is something that essentially doesn't exist anymore. My character decided, or has been raised so to believe, that everybody who has put their minds into a different body or done. Basically, anybody who has ever put their mind into another body is dead. Their soul has been detached from their body, so they're just the walking dead. I have a biblical verse somewhere about forms the basis for this, but Nina R has a character, Asher, who is not somebody who has basically in Eclipse phase it's called resleeving, putting your mind into another body. She still inhabits the body she was put into, but she is a created being. She was specifically grown and was not actually born. And so I didn't think about this at the time I was creating my character. And through my interactions with her, it pointed out a flaw in my character's ideology, his religious beliefs. And so that has really evolved my character by forcing him, and me by extension, to go back to the scriptures and see, like, can this person be saved if they're not a born human? Like, I specifically made this character to be so incredibly resistant to the ideas of Eclipse phase, to be antithetical to everything that Eclipse phase stands for. But this part of the book I didn't read, and so I didn't have a schema for how to deal with this, and it has served both in and out of character to really grow what's been going on.
Nice.
That's a good example. Yeah, I like that. I hadn't really put that together, and I'm in the game as well. That because I did notice some subtle changes, but I didn't know what was the cause of that. But then again, my character's off in his own world for the entire session anyway, so.
And it's been like a month and a half since we've played.
Also a fair point.
So we've talked about some big changes in characters, and my most recent example is kind of a minor change. It's a minor tweak. Are there any other like minor changes to your characters, or just quirks that they have picked up in the course of a game? Because I've got a great example of a character who picked up a quirk. I was playing an Eberron game, and it's important that it's Eberron because this doesn't exist in other.
Eberron?
It is a D&D setting where technology or magic has advanced kind of to the point where there is some like magically run trains, airships, stuff like that. Without going too much into it, the feel of the game is just after a great war, so it really feels like the Roaring 20s.
I love it. Cool.
That's enough backstory of Eberron. My character is a wizard, and wizards can have these little things called spell shards. They're little crystals that you use instead of a spell book. Well, after the second time in this campaign that my character had all of his stuff taken from him and could not get it back, these spell shards are described as being a little smaller than a fist. Mm-hmm. So my character resolved to never again be without a spell book. So he began every single day after he got done memorizing his spells, taking his spell shard and shoving it up his ass so that nobody could take his spells away from him.
Wow. I did not see that coming.
What a twist!
Wow! What a character.
That's amazing.
And I made sure to play it up in the campaign.
Ooh.
I guess I have a also humorous example. I was playing in a game, maybe I've talked about it before, but a game based off the anime One Piece once, and my character was a swordsman and a bodyguard by trade. But everyone would always joke that, like, he was a swordsman only in name, because I would never really want to fight people. And this spun out of two things. One, I was playing, this is my first time doing sort of a hybrid Savage Worlds game, so I had it was like Savage Worlds and Numenera mixed, which was a very bizarre concept, but it worked, but I didn't have any idea how combat works, so I was always very hesitant, despite playing a combat character, to get into combat. And then two, I was just having such a fun time, like, talking to the villains, that I never wanted to fight. And so What would always happen was for that entire game, never ended up striking first. They would always get fed up with me talking and just like haul off and punch me in the face or something. And so eventually, like, word began to spread around the world of this swordsman who would never strike the first blow. And so people would go and they'd be like, "Oh, you're him. I hear that, you don't strike the first blow because of your immense strength." And my character would just be like, yeah, that's it, all right, not obviously wanting to, I think I even got, like, a passive for, like, as long as I don't strike the first blow in combat, like, I get an extra +2 or something.
That's cool.
But it was all just based over the fact that, like, I was having a blast talking to people, and the GM would just be like, "Guys, we need to fight." And he's like, I can't talk anymore. He's like, "I hit you," That's an example of a quirk that my character sort of picked up, and he kind of embraced it after a while, where he'd be like, he turned into this weird honor thing where he'd be like, "Yes, my honor doesn't let me make the first blow," and stuff like that. But it's my example.
I love that. That's hysterical. I don't have any quirks, I just have sadness.
Does Demona have any quirks?
Well, she started off with a quirk. She actually, in one of her hindrances, she is quirky. Where in the beginning of the game, I thought it'd be really funny if, because she's on a quest to find her dad, but she doesn't know who her dad is. She only knows is that there's some sort of male-perceiving human. So every time she saw a male-perceiving humanoid, she'd walk up to them and go, "Hi, I'm Desdemona. Are you my dad?" To every single character. And it's kind of gone away, and I really wish I could bring it back. But I know who my dad is now. But,
so you don't need it anymore.
I don't need it anymore. But I specifically...
In RL, though, you need a shirt that says that.
Uh-huh.
"Hi, are you my dad?"
I love that. I specifically remember in game, we had to go over the difference between dad and daddy. It was great. Because, ooh, what a character. No, I don't have any quirks. I had a thing about, characters changing for the not better. But,
I actually could not really think of a concrete example.
That's okay.
Now that I think about it, like, most of my characters that have changed, like, either changed for the better or changed, like, sort of neutrally. Like, I have, the one example I can actively think of is I had a character that was, like, an asshole coming into the game, and he was very cocky and self-assured, and no one broke him of that, so he just got, like, I guess in that case he got worse, but he just became more and more self-absorbed. Because that was one of those few games where I would roll out of my mind. Magnus also rolled out of his mind, now that I think about it. This character, just very rarely got bad rolls. And so, his ego just ballooned, And I guess, would you consider that a bad thing?
No, if the players are having fun and the DM is having fun, I guess it wouldn't be a bad thing. I'm talking about things that specifically hinder your characters in a way you weren't expecting.
Okay.
Do you remember fun romance times when everything was good, friends? There's a second half to that where it's not as good and fun. Shit got dark real fast.
Now, before you get into this, based off my limited knowledge of things you've said about this campaign, was this change, and this is purely a mechanics thing, was this change affected by you as a player, or did it happen through the course of the game and this character was an NPC?
So it started off as something when, so the first two sessions was run by my friend Tanner, and then the next game was run by me. And this is something I did to myself. I was like, we'll just figure it out! And now I'm a player again, and I really changed too much. I set the tone for the next half of the game, and it's dark and sad, and everything's awful. And my character has to deal with the fact that she has emotions and also lots of problems now. And it's not really going in her favor, and I don't know how to play. Actually, I'm running a one-shot today where hopefully we're going to fix all those problems with my friends.
Well, and this brings up a question. Mm-hmm. So, for everyone at the table, you play a game with a character, right? Clayton, I know Gath is an example for you, who was a character you had in another game that became an NPC in a game you ran. Does character growth change when you're affecting it upon your old character, like, as you're now the GM and they're now an NPC? Is that different from the way, as a player, you affect character change on your player character?
Definitely. I can't think of an example of an NPC who has changed unexpectedly.
I guess because you pull all the strings of the universe, yeah. That's a fair point.
I mean, I based the entire game that I ran off of the consequences that Rob and Annalise would have to face and how that would affect everybody else because they're part of the consequences. And I didn't really think of it outside of a finished story because I'm a playwright. I like beginning, middle, end. I know where it's going to end. I know where it's going to start. And I didn't think about the consequences of those consequences. So now we're just in hell. We're just
but the way you're describing this is that the unaffected change did happen. For you,
yes,
at
it
least.
did. Yeah, it did.
Because you're now dealing with things with this character that even though you, question mark, as the GM put them through, you're now like, wow, I didn't see that coming. I didn't foresee myself doing that to myself.
Yeah, no, she's in a really bad place right now in the sense of, like, she didn't think that her relationship would be the driving force of her character. But it is, apparently, and she has apparently a lot of sad emotions about it, because her boyfriend doesn't love her and has abandoned her to die, essentially. Well, at least that's how she views it. But, it's taken a really dark turn, and it's changed her in the sense that she's sadder, and she's a lot more desperate and acts out in rage a lot. And that's not something I had ever intended for that character, and it's been really hard to, like, figure it out. More specifically, I don't even play my actual character sometimes. Sometimes she's a completely different person. And hopefully that will end tonight when I kill the other person living inside of my body.
Wow.
Yeah.
Here we are.
Here we are. In Sadnessville.
So I'm going to amend what I just said about like characters not changing, NPCs not changing. NPCs do not change after the session in which they are introduced. The result of player character roles, which can sometimes be so phenomenally good or so abysmally bad that it completely changes the way an NPC would interact with him, happens all the time for first encounters. I can think of a dozen examples where I have created an NPC and the result of whatever roles the player characters do whenever they first meet them completely changes everything that I was going to do with that character.
Example?
In the Abena wrap-up. Yes. I will give several examples.
Yay! I'm so excited.
I think that's everything I was going to say about that.
I guess that's just interesting for me because I sometimes feel like NPCs change, sometimes based off player actions. Like, let's say, you introduce an NPC, they become really good friends with a paladin, and then something happens in that paladin storyline that changes the way he thinks and acts, and, like, now he's this anti-paladin, and maybe that NPC doesn't agree with that. Like, does that cause... Or maybe they do. Maybe all of a sudden they're like, wow, like, the wool has been pulled from my eyes, like, that's a sudden change for them. Does that count, or is that, again, just you as the GM being like, I'm writing this in?
I feel like it's all just me writing it in, writing the story as it evolves. I don't feel like I'm putting a big strong wall around just the way that an NPC may change because it's all so planned out that there's no spontaneity to it. Even with the characters that we've described, like planning the growth of, we can't plan exactly when and how that change is going to happen.
Right.
And I don't feel like yeah, maybe an NPC might be forced to change if, like, their best friend player character suddenly takes a big change. But it's still entirely within my wheelhouse as to how that change happens. Mm-hmm. It's not based on... I keep talking and I keep convincing myself otherwise. I don't know.
I think this is a tough one.
My answer is I don't know.
I think that NPCs do change. Like, when I wasn't running Vamps, but Tanner was, who was playing Rob when Rob and Annalise first met, we would talk after sessions, be like, yeah, this is really interesting, because Rob is a lone wolf. He doesn't like people. He doesn't like anybody. He's there to blow things up. He's not there for your boobs. And discovering that, and he's like, oh, maybe that is something that would change. And working through that as him, so him telling me as a DM how these NPCs are changing around us, depending on how us as the player characters interact with them. I think it's a really interesting dynamic we have, because I think something that we have to take into account is that the DM plays all of the other characters. You're only playing one character. They're playing all of them. So they have their own goals, they have their own wants, they have their own things that they want to change or might be affected in. So yeah, I would say NPCs change. That's the point of stories and having characters.
Yeah, I think named NPCs change, but like Shopkeeper A is not going to have this massive character arc, even if you go in and like, I mean, I guess, you know what, you go in, you slaughter his whole family and rob his shop, maybe then he becomes this force of vengeance after you. That's a character change. Like,
okay, here's my view.
Mm-hmm.
Condensed it.
Okay, condensed. Here's my view on NPCs changing. It doesn't matter because they're not player characters. The game master can dictate everything they want about the NPCs. They can have a great change within the NPC, but ultimately within the story, it doesn't matter because it's the player character's story.
Right.
So whether or not an NPC can change,
doesn't matter.
I don't
in the
care.
First place.
I agree.
The hard line has been drawn. A line in the sand, if you will.
I have the problem where I care about everybody in a story. Like, I care about Acerak, the villain of a beta game. I want to know his story. Can he change? I want to know!
And I think that,
I care.
that alternates, the game universe that I've been mentioning quite frequently this podcast session. The GM definitely, and maybe this could give some insight into his actions, or not actions, that's not what I meant to say, not a, judgmental way, into the way he runs games. Is that he considers it a living universe in his mind. That, all these NPCs and all the PCs, they're all just players in this universe that's constantly changing, and, NPC stories are just as important as PC stories. The PCs are just sort of the lens that the world is seen, or the universe is seen through. But, there's always constantly stuff happening in the background, and all this other stuff. And so, to him, he would definitely, if he were at this table, I'm sure, sit down and say that NPCs definitely do change based on, stuff, and it does matter because it matters to this living, ever-evolving universe. Now, Abena, for example, and maybe you can shed some light on this, Clayton, when we're off in Elvenland fighting the Vikinger invasion, do you, in your head, have all these other plot lines going on in all the other continents, all these other things happening, for example?
I have a couple of things that are happening that I've got a time frame that they're happening in parallel with what events that are going on. But those are all relating to the main plot line. Mm-hmm. There is I don't know anything about what's going on in the world that is not directly relating to the plot. I don't spend that mental energy because it's not going to get used for anything.
Mm-hmm. Now, Hayley,
yes.
for example, do you... Because I guess what this is coming down to, in some extent, is GM styles. So, does your universe have this sort of living thing?
It does, but that's because...
Say, if I had to take a bet.
Yeah!
Gee, I wonder, Hayley.
Well, I always want to make sure that my players have something to do. For example, not a vampire game! Oh my god, wow, stories! I'm running a World of Darkness Innocence game, where all the players are playing kids in the 1980s at a summer camp. And I have so many things going on in the sense of, yeah, you could be a kid, you could go play soccer, or you can investigate the fact that there's a thousand-eyed bear in the woods, or maybe the lifeguard is actually the lake monster, or that kids are going missing and being replaced with twig monsters. Whatever you guys want to do, I have all of these things going on at once, and if they're not going to do anything about it, the summer will go on as it will. And I really enjoy, I'm playing around with that, so I know what's going on in the world, even if the players don't. In the sense of they'll probably never go investigate that. But you know what? Just in case they do, I want it to be fully fleshed out. I want there to be this full story for them to embark on. And I've been having a lot of fun with it.
By the time you have a bear with 1,000 eyes, you really just have 1,000 eyes kind of shaped like a bear?
That's a lot of eyes.
It is a lot of eyes. So the way they have it is that it's just this giant bear, and its eyes are like mohawks, and they're from the peeping eyes of children who got lost in the woods. And he is always watching and stuff. Oh, it's so cool! Sorry. I'm having a lot of fun with this campaign, if you can't tell. Because, so there's something special about the 1980s and summer camp movies.
So in this campaign, does it matter who shoots the best? If there's no player characters there, do you go ahead and decide who wins the archery contest if none of the player characters are competing in the archery contest?
Well, if the kids aren't signed up to do archery that day, then yes.
Wait, so you pick someone.
You spend mental energy deciding on things that not only do the players not care, not only are they not invested in, not only are they not participating in it,
Well,
but
if they're going to ask
never
about it, I know. I was like, yeah, of course. That's what Cabin 6
That's
is
you
doing.
arbitrarily picking a name out of a hat and being like, yes, he won this. It's not like you, while the game's going on in the back of your head, you're like, yes,
So-
no, the archery hat.
Oh, no. I care about my player characters. Oh, no. I'm not going to waste time on what Cabin 2 is doing while I'm in a fucking game session.
Thank
And
you.
I'm not going to spend time outside of the game things like, I wonder what's going on with that softball team in Cabin 7. But just in case, hey, you guys are on a hike with Cabin 2 and Cabin 7. I want to make sure they have actual people with actual goals and actual things to interact with. And I know what's going on with them during the summer.
There's a big difference, though, between just knowing what's going on with an NPC and having this big story written out for them that is not related to the plot whatsoever.
Okay.
And that's definitely,
I'm not doing that. Fuck that shit.
Like, that is, and now we're phrasing this in a negative context, and because that is the way that the person I mentioned, they run games that way. Like, when there's downtime, they're writing stories about NPCs and all this other stuff, and it's this big sprawling thing. I am inclined, and that's their prerogative. Like, that's cool that they do that, and they have that outlet for their creative energy, you know. But like, I'm more inclined to agree with you that like, when I run a game, I like to have NPCs and like to have them like be dynamic characters. I don't want them to be static, but I'm also not the entire time being like, well, these two are having this conversation right now, or something like that, you know, or Cabin 7's winning the softball tournament. Gee, who would, you know, does that make sense, I guess?
Yeah.
It is a lot of
Unless it's like a DLC of information that might come into play later. I'm not going to write a 3-page story on it.
Yeah, and, you know, also, he's trying to turn this into a comic. He's working with an artist, so maybe he feels he needs to flesh this out for that reason as well. But
Yeah, I mean, if it's something you really enjoy, and I think it hugely depends too on how much you care whether the information gets used or not. Because if you don't really care if it gets used and you're enjoying creating it, then that's fine. But I think that if you do care if it gets used and you're constantly creating more that can be used, I think you're at a higher risk for burnout, probably.
Yes.
I don't know. Hold on. Okay. So when I was running my first session of AMPS, well, my first campaign of AMPS, I knew that the campaign about the players is figuring out what the fuck happened to Rob and Annalise and why everything is awful. And to do that, I sat myself down and was like, okay, I know these characters. I called up the person who wrote and normally plays Rob, and we sat down and we went through all of the steps of like almost an entire mini campaign of how they got fucked up and why they're missing. And that way I knew my entire mystery, and I planned and I wrote all of this stuff that the players were only going to find out snippets of, and maybe a lot of it wouldn't be important, but it would be important, so I had a coherent story for them to like figure out why they're missing. Is that kind of like that? Or is that like is that a waste of time?
Because it's been player character, because it was previously played by players, those characters still aren't really NPCs.
Okay.
When I'm thinking about like just making all of these copious amounts of notes about just all this other stuff going around in the world, I'm assuming that nobody cares.
Okay.
Nobody cares which orc lord has the biggest domain up in the orc and fey lands of Ebena.
Well, I care, Clayton. I made the orcs.
The Orc Fey Alliance is the most important one in all of Ebena.
I mean, that's a fair point, though. Like, at the same time. I didn't mean to
No,
cut
no,
you
no,
off.
yeah.
I know.
No, that was my entire point. Nobody cares. But
Okay.
if we had a player character who was up there during some downtime and they wanted a brief rundown of kind of what they encountered, I would give a brief rundown of what's going on.
Okay, cool.
But the line of player character and non-player character is a very distinct line, and I feel like everything that the NPCs do that does not directly relate or come into play with a player character, everything else is just wasted if you're it's
Gotcha.
wasted energy.
I think that it's good to talk about, like, different ways to run games. Because I guess if you got the mental energy to try and do that sort of game, you know, and it is something that you're trying to expand beyond just being a game, you know, go for it, more power to you. But, like, if you're just running a game for your, like, friends, or it's just something you're doing on the weekly, like, I think it's a lot harder to do that sort of thing.
Yeah. And like Beth said, it's hard to keep from getting burnt out.
Exactly.
If you're doing all that extra work for nothing. Mm-hmm. Well, guys, what do you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice?
I still don't have dice to bring to make a rolling noise when we do the ending.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.